Resident Evil 5 is a game that needs no introduction. Releasing on Xbox 360 and PS3 in March of 2009, it quickly became the highest-selling Resident Evil game of all time. Despite being somewhat controversial among the core Resident Evil fanbase due to the lack of survival horror, the game still received massive successes as an amazing co-op action horror shooter. One of my very first memories of gaming in general is just sitting down with my older brother and blasting through the hordes of Magini the game throws your way. For my 5 or 6-year-old self, it was a blast, up until Chapter 2-1 when the Chainsaw Magini was introduced. As a kid, I was literally so terrified of him, I'd burst into tears if I even suspected him showing up in a level. Which is funny considering that I wasn't afraid of literally anything else in that game, except for the chainsaw guy. But anyways, I'm getting a little sidetracked. All of this is to say that Resident Evil 5 is a game that is extremely special to many Resident Evil fans, including myself. And with the massive success of the Resident Evil 4 remake, all eyes are seemingly on Resident Evil 5 as the next remake to be released. So today, I'm going to go over what I, personally, would like to see in a modern Resident Evil 5 remake. But before we get into that, I want to let you all in on a little secret. None of you are subscribed. If you are, thank you, but a majority of you guys are not, and I'm just saying, subscribing could really help me out, you know. Especially if you enjoy this video. With that out of the way, let's get into the video. Welcome to the main part of this video, wherein I will be going over this list I prepared of just a bunch of things I would like to either be added or changed about the base game to hopefully make the game even greater than it already is. To start this list off, I've written Keep Parrying, which is a pretty big part of the Resident Evil 4 Remake's combat loop. It's a fairly new addition to the series. I don't think it was kind of present in the Resident Evil 4 base and Resident Evil 5, but not to the degree that we see now, where you could literally, like, parry, like, a 20-foot boss's attacks. It's a very fun mechanic that could serve to further enrich the gameplay loop of Resident Evil 5's. And out of all of the weird mechanics that some Resident Evil games have introduced, like the remake for 3's weird dodge mechanic, and Resident Evil 6's, I'm not sure what you would call it, like a rolling system? Like advanced movement? I don't know. Out of all the weird movement things that they've added, I feel like parrying is the one that they should keep with. It's the best one, and they should definitely keep in future Resident Evil games. Okay, so number 2 is limit the QuickTime events. I think I can speak for everybody here and say that the QuickTime events in Resident Evil were literally the worst. I mean, in Resident Evil 5 they weren't as bad as like Resident Evil 6. Main problem I have with 6 is just the copious amount of QuickTime events. And I feel like removing and tweaking some of the QuickTime events would drastically improve the experience, the overall experience in Resident Evil 5. Especially if we were able to, say, convert some of them to actual playable sections. For instance, the section where you go to the helicopter crash, that entire section is just a needless QuickTime event. I mean, it could all just be summed up in a cutscene. What would be better, actually, than just a cutscene is just having it be a playable section where you hold off hordes of the Magini in the game to protect the helicopter crash in general. And it would fit more with the game's theme of being very action-heavy. And anyways, the gist is, remove the damn QuickTime event. Another one, which I believe should be flat-out removed, is on the tanker with Excella. I think that whole chase sequence is just stupid. I mean, there's really no point in it. I mean, it adds tension, but it achieves the exact same goal that a cutscene would. So, it would just be better if it were purely just a cutscene, or actually have us in the game running, instead of just watching for a button prompt and then smashing that button prompt. And the QuickTime events don't even add that much to the gameplay of Resident Evil 5. On my most recent playthrough on it with first time on PC playing it, I don't know what kind of settings I had activated, but by default they were just completely removed. And literally nothing was lost. I think I had a better time playing through the game without them than having them in. I mean, the cutscenes definitely seemed weird and out of place. You could tell that a QuickTime event was present at some point, but it had the same effect on the gameplay that the QuickTime events had. I mean, like, nothing was gained or lost from the narrative from removing the QuickTime events. Oh, and one more thing before we move on to the next one. Keep defensive items, please. Like, just keep that with the different types of knives that you can pick up. And, you know, when you're grabbed by an enemy, you can just stab them right in the jugular to stop them from grabbing you. Just keep that, please, because it is a very convenient feature to have. It's better than just sitting there, like, mashing a key on your keyboard or just, like, spinning your joystick around, like, 20 times just to get out of a grapple. Third on my list is add more open areas, like open spaces. So, coming off of Resident Evil 8 and the Resident Evil 4 remake, both of those had a very open map. There were various areas where you could just completely ignore and be fine, but it was beneficial to you to seek out and explore these places due to the loot that was contained within those places, whether it be a secret weapon or having any type of treasure or key that could open up to potentially more treasure further on in the game. This sort of system is just, in general, better than just running through a level start to finish and then getting ready for the next level. It's kind of boring that way, and having an open map for you to explore and having things to actually, you know, find in the far off reaches of the map is just 10 times better than, you know, having a start to finish. My favorite part of the Resident Evil 4 remake is just having those sections where you're free to explore this greater area. For instance, like the lake level and the castle level. Both of those are, I think, some of my favorite sections of the game. And because of the way that these sections are laid out, the game encourages you to actually explore the level more instead of just going one set path like in Resident Evil 5. The next on my list is add a merchant. Now, there was nothing wrong with the item management screen, but I feel like adding a merchant would just be cooler. Having a character there where you actually talk to upgrade your gear is just a better format for this. And especially if we're going to go the route of having more open areas, if we have a level that lasts forever, and the only way to check up on your gear and repair things like maybe a military vest or a knife is to finish the level in question, I can imagine that is very frustrating. So maybe have the merchant somewhere where the player is going to backtrack to a lot of the time to sort of make it more available to people who may or may not be in need of it. The next one is kind of a personal request. I mean, you can take it or leave it. Don't have a lot of experience for it because it's a feature that was in Resident Evil 6, and as we know, that game wasn't exactly popular, and I kind of jumped on playing it pretty late. But the feature is Agent Hunt. I think the idea of a sort of invasion mode like Agent Hunt is very interesting. Having like some random person connect to your world and play as one of the creatures to actively work against you, I feel like it would be pretty fun, especially if you're already playing with someone. So it's not just you and the AI against some random invader. It's you, your friend, and the person who decided to connect to the world. I just think that system is very interesting. It could be just not added to the game, would not change the quality, but I just think it would be pretty cool if it were added. On to number 6, I would say remove or tweak the on-rail section. And what I mean by on-rail section is mostly the Savannah ride, the Nadesu boss fight, and the section where you're on the boat with Josh. I don't have that much of a problem with the on-rail segment with Josh, so we're just going to ignore that part. But the Savannah ride and the Nadesu boss fight, like, easily worst part of the game. I hate it. Just garbage, okay? So if we could just put it into a cutscene, or just do anything to make it better, that would be great. Like, for instance, the Nadesu boss fight would be 10 times better if, you know, we weren't in the back of the Humvee the entire time with a machine gun, shooting at that big motherfucker's feet the whole time. And the Savannah ride that comes before it, it's just, I can't think of a single good thing to say about it other than it's a nice spectacle. I mean, in a movie it would be cool to watch, but to play and just have to, it's so boring. I dislike it immensely and would love to just see it never return to the game. I'm sorry if you would disagree with that. In general, I don't like on-rail sections in video games. The only exception is, again, the Josh section in Resident Evil 5 and the minecart section in the Resident Evil 4 remake. I feel like that one's done pretty well. It doesn't take forever, and it's not, like, really annoying to deal with. You know, it's incredibly easy. Next up is keep the multiplayer. I know I sort of implied this with Agent Hunt, but there's a group of some people who, upon hearing about this remake, want to completely remove the partners system from Resident Evil 5, and I just don't agree with it. Some of my most favorite memories of this game are getting off of school and playing Resident Evil 5 with either my older brother or some of my best friends and having a blast playing it. And I feel like removing that from Resident Evil 5 removes just a core piece of its identity. While I realized in the original that having this partner system would often cause the single player experience to suffer due to having to replace the partner with an AI, we just take one look at Louis Serra in Resident Evil 4. I mean, and Ashley to an extent. They're like barely in the way. Of course, they have to be there. There's a narrative reason for them being there. But this narrative reason doesn't negatively affect the gameplay. Unlike in Resident Evil 5 with Sheva's presence, which, if you're playing solo, often she is just the most annoying thing in the game. So my solution to those playing single player, I would just say make Sheva more like Luis. Have her there, because, you know, of course she has to be there, but make her effect on the gameplay as little as possible outside of puzzles. I feel like that would just make any single player experience for Resident Evil 5 just 10 times better. Another thing I'd like to see when it comes to multiplayer, at least, is to see Chris and Sheva be separated more often from each other. I'm going to use Resident Evil 6 as an example for this. I've only recently really played Chris's campaign, so I'm going to get everything from there. Two examples of this is the chapter in Edonia and the tanker level. Both of these have really good sections illustrating the separation of partners, with Edonia having that section with the tank where Chris has to protect Finn from the tank and the incoming Dravo. In order to complete this section, both you and your partner have to take two completely different ways, with Piers having to take a sniper lookout, and you, Chris, having to go down there with Finn and go toe-to-toe with a fucking tank. And the only way to progress past this point is, as Chris, to draw the tank out far enough in order for Piers, your partner, to take the shot at a fuel tank and destroy the tank and a lot of the Dravo near it. And then with the tanker level, what you need to do is you need to get to a missile, and you need to get to and arm a missile in order to blow a bulkhead open for you to progress. And that requires you to throw Piers over a gap in a bridge to the missile, and as Chris, you have to regroup, and you actually have to use a pipe to climb over to Piers and the missile in order to arm it and blast through the bulkhead. This is all while your partner has to fend off from the Neo Umbrella Dravo that are racing towards him, and not only that, he has to defend you from oncoming snipers who are sniping at you while you are climbing over to him on the pipe. Both of these examples highlight very stressful moments in Resident Evil 6, and kind of enhance any sort of horror that was in the game. There wasn't really any, but it was a little bit nerve-wracking, you could say. But in a remake of 5, if we're trying to focus back on survival horror in the remake, I feel like adding these sections would enhance the sort of horror feel. You know, one of the main things with Resident Evil 5 is that the presence of your partner 24/7 kind of take away from the isolation and the horror of that game. But having your partner in some points, you know, helping you out, that's kind of your lifeline. But then in certain points, especially certain harder points, if you were to take away that lifeline, that's 10 times, you know, scarier for you, because, you know, you wouldn't have anything to fall back on if, you know, you got put into the dying state, you know. You'd just be screwed. We're approaching the end of the video here, and I just want to say, if you've made it this far, thank you. And this current section is flesh out Sheva and Chris's dynamic more, or just improve her as a whole. In the original Resident Evil 5, even though she's with you throughout the entire game, you don't really find out that much about her through the course of the story. Most of the information about her is found out in the files of the game, but in-game, like in gameplay, the most we find out is that she trained under Josh, and that her family was a victim of Umbrella. That's it. Not only that, it's just, her presence there is just weird. I mean, we understand that she's there to help Chris out because he's, not really native to West Africa, clearly. But the story of Resident Evil 5 is incredibly personal to, like, original Resident Evil fans. I mean, it's literally the end of Albert Wesker, the main guy who's been causing trouble in the Resident Evil world for, like, fucking 20 years now. And also, half the plot is Chris trying to find Jill, one of the original STARS members, and we come to find out Jill was literally kidnapped and brainwashed by Albert Wesker to do his bidding, which is, like, horrible. So we have these two really important narratives going on at the exact same time. It's insanely personal to Chris and Jill. But meanwhile, all this important shit is happening. Sheva is just there, and I can't imagine she has any idea what's fucking going on. I mean, she has no connection to Chris other than being his current partner. She has no connection to Jill, absolutely no connection to Wesker. So like I said, her presence in the story is just very strange. She is the world's biggest third wheel. So to remedy her being a big third wheel, I'd say add some sort of plot, some motivation for her to continue working with Chris other than for the good of the world, or I'm sticking with you because I'm your partner. Just please give her an actual motivation for continuing on with Chris other than, the things I just said. Last on my list is not really a big one, but it's sort of important. I would really like to see Ouroboros be more of a threat, because in the game we have like 4 boss battles I can think of, and half of them aren't really good. Like, the first one was alright, but I don't know. Ouroboros just did not seem threatening enough for what it was, being advertised. And I think what could help this is maybe seeing more of Ouroboros outside of scripted boss battles. Like, maybe after the first boss fight with the Ouroboros test subject, you could see that test subject as an enemy afterwards, and have, Ouroboros-ified Majini. Just make them more present in the game other than seeing them in really shitty boss battles, Just have them there, especially near the latter half of the game where you're trying to find Wesker and, stop Ouroboros as a whole. That's a good place to, put them, since they're kind of a more difficult enemy to tackle than, your regular Majini. And with that over and done with, I would just like to thank you all for watching, if you're still watching anyways. This video was a blast to make, with all the buzz about, remakes, DLC, I just felt like I had to put my 2 cents in, especially when it's about Resident Evil 5, a Resident Evil game that is so flawed yet perfect in my eyes. Now, I don't know if I'm going to keep recording or making videos about stuff like this, so don't expect an upload like every week or whatever, but, if you enjoyed this video, just drop a like or something, and subscribe. Oh, and let me know if you enjoyed the video in the comments below. So, with the sentimentals out of the way, I'm just going to say, have a good one. See ya.